Awesome. And Peter, we're going to give it just like a minute for everybody to kind of roll on in.
Sounds good.
Hi, everyone. We're going to let everybody join and probably give it another minute or so as everybody's moving out of the waiting room into the main room, and then we'll get started. Is it always sunny in Philadelphia, Peter?
That's what they say. It is right now, but thunderstorms later and, oppressive hot humidity. So everyone's complaining, except me. I don't mind. It's good.
Well, we're all inside, so we only get to see from the windows.
That's right. And it looks sunny. So that's all we care about.
Peter, I am so excited to have you here today. I wanted to do a brief introduction of myself just to kind of set it, and then I am going to do what I'm sure is always embarrassing to you, which is give a little bit of an introduction to you from your amazingly impressive bio. And then I wanted to jump into some questions about you and about your philosophy and the way that you work. And then we'll dig into some questions around how businesses should be thinking about what's going on kind of in their houses today and how they might consider a way to digitally transform better. Sound good?
Sounds like a good plan. Absolutely. Let's do it.
I'm excited. So my name's Jascha Kaykas-Wolff. I appreciate everybody being here with Peter and I today. By way of background, I've spent the last 20 years in go-to-market executive positions, from running product teams at places like Microsoft and Yahoo, through to being the chief marketing officer for Mozilla Corporation, which creates the Firefox browser, over the course of the last half of decade. So I've been in the middle of digital transformation and thinking about data and its relationship into marketing for my entire career. About 5 months ago, I joined as the president of an organization called Lytics, who's hosting this webinar today. Lytics is in a category called customer data platforms, which I think that the kind of acronym of CDP is a bit of a misnomer. Like, fundamentally, what the business that we're in is focused on is helping our customers find a connection between the right data, not all of the data, and the right data science, which is on our platform, to help them transform digitally in a way that's better, that has a higher probability of being successful. And kind of with that as a background, I am unbelievably thrilled, Peter, to be able to have this conversation with you today, because you and I share a similar passion and a focus on let's get to the right data and use data to inform the way that our businesses work. For those of you that don't know Peter, Peter is the Francis Peiwan Shaw Professor of Marketing in the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania. That is an unbelievably important post to have. And I say that, Peter, because I know that your expertise has kind of revolved around thinking about the analysis of behavioral data and understanding how to forecast that. And you've been teaching it, but it's not just you teaching it, you've also been taking it into practice. So in addition to everything that you do at Wharton, which quite frankly could be a job in and of itself, you've also co-founded companies. You co-founded a firm called Zodiac that you ultimately sold to Nike in 2018, which was focused on just that, how you take behavioral data and use it to inform the way that the company can be better. You've started another company called Data Equity Partners, which is working under a similar construct. So at this point, everybody that's listening should fully empathize with the fact that Peter is an incredibly busy and important person. But you don't even stop there, Peter. Like, you've gone on to author books. Actually, a book that I really enjoy, Customer-Centricity, the focus on the right customers for strategic advantage. And I think you and a writing partner have gone on to write a playbook around how to put the ideas in customer-centricity into practice. So, yeah, like, you are unbelievably well known in the marketing and analytics space, and I'm thrilled to be able to have you here. So thank you for taking the time with all of us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Jascha, just keep on going. Just keep keeping on the praise and making stuff up. No, but it's great to talk to you. And it's just wonderful to find kind of a like-minded soulmate like yourself and your whole team at Lytics. Lots to discuss, and I'm just so glad that people are so interested.
I want to start with some questions about you. So I've always kind of had way off into the future in my mind's eye this view that it would be amazing to be a professor, but to get to be a professor, you've got to do so much, and it's hard. So there's always been a trade-off in my mind of, do you focus on academia and teaching, or do you consider working in the private sector and maybe even being a founder? You found a way to do both, be a founder, CEO, be a professor and a consultant. Like, what's the story for you personally getting to where that you are today?
I wasn't born to be a professor. I mean, there aren't that many people who wake up on their, ninth birthday and say, "Mommy, I want to be a marketing professor." So I'm like a normal guy, and I just like, I just like crunching numbers and forecasting things. I was always obsessed with sports statistics and uh, music industry. I love looking at song movement through the Billboard charts. And it was in 1983, this one professor, her name is Lee McAllister. She was at MIT at the time. She's now at the University of Texas. And she said, "You ought to get a PhD in marketing." And I said, "You ought to get your head checked." I'm going, "Marketing? I'm a math guy." But she painted this picture. And again, keep in mind, this was 1983, which is like, 1,000 years ago, about what marketing would become. The ability to tag and track individual customers, the ability to send different messages to different people and to project this and understand that. She painted a picture that really came true. And she basically said, if you like forecasting things, if you like playing around with data, if you like making a difference, this is the field for you. And I look back now, nearly 40 years, and I thank her endlessly. And I was just, so I don't want to sound all kind of falsy, humble bragging about it, but I mean it sincerely. Right place, right time, right fairy godmother. I'm not sure that I would have done the same thing today, and I'm not sure that other people doing it today would find the same good fortune that I've had.
Well, I think like having an influence in your life that helps kick you off in a direction like that is incredibly important, but it isn't always easy to connect the dots between a path like that, get a PhD in marketing, and founding a company. Are there dynamics for you personally where you get excited about both the theory and the practice that have made your story what it is today?
Because I don't care about the theory. And I shouldn't say that. I'm an academic, but I'm not a theoretical kind of guy. I'm not interested in proving things. I'm not interested in doing what all the economists do, which is, if people were rational, if markets were efficient, if pigs could fly, this is what would happen. No, I want to know what is happening, what's likely to happen, how long will it happen. So I've always been very, very, very grounded. I want to explain things as they are. Fortunately, the academia has been kind of warmly inviting that I can develop new statistical methodologies. I can talk about new data structures. I can talk about new managerial practices. But every paper I've written has been motivated by and is presumably applicable to a real world setting. So part of it has been my values, part of it's been the values of the Wharton School. And there really are a lot of theory people out there who hate what I do because it's not grounded and it doesn't have any equilibrium or utility maximization. And I don't care, bring it on. But my models work. And they can really help companies operate more effectively.
I think that's really fascinating. I've always talked about over my career, there is a difference. It's not binary, but there's a difference between thought leaders and do leaders. And I think finding yourself in a situation where you can be a do leader is actually really exciting and oftentimes not appreciated in all of the different places that we spend our time. Hey, I'm curious, I want to push back a little bit.
Yeah, go.
I want to push back a little bit on this idea that professors and theory don't always land well in organizations that are trying to work. And maybe that's not exactly my words to you, so maybe a bit of a pushback there. But I'm really curious: are there things that you have picked up and taught in academia that you think are valuable inside of organizations, or even vice versa?
Yeah, that's the reality of it. Is that I keep looking at these patterns about how customers behave and how many of them will we acquire and how long will they stay and how they respond to this kind of message or that kind of message. Again, grounded in very practical issues. But then I look at the managerial practices on similar issues and they're way out of line with each other. So I've spent most of my career yelling at companies saying, wait a minute, that's the wrong way to go. You're targeting the wrong customers, you're doing the wrong way, you're spending too much money on the wrong kind of vehicle. So for years, I've kind of known the reality of customer behavior, which has been completely out of whack with managerial practice. And it's been my job to try to, to build a bridge between the two and to try to get people over to my side.
I appreciate that. Well, let's talk a little bit about kind of that customer behavior, but I want to do it in the kind of broader context of a concept that I know you have thought quite a bit about and written about. That's digital transformation. So there was an article that I read recently, a report that I read recently, I think it was Dell and maybe McKinsey that had done it together. And they basically said over the course of the last 20 years, they've talked to hundreds of different companies that have said, we care about digital transformation. We care about understanding and being able to interact with our customers that are online. And they've been making investments. And those investments have been made in a very specific way. Like investments in digital transformation are kind of like big, huge, monolithic, sequential investments that takes months or years. You connect every bit of data that you have together. And then at the end, you're like, okay, cool, I've got all my data together. Let's go do something. But this article called out something that I thought was fascinating. They said in the order of magnitude is about 80% of companies that start down the path of doing digital transformation fail, or they don't get to where they want to get to. And that's crazy. Right? Like as somebody who's been in the industry for a while, I've been in it for the last 20 years. How do you keep doing something the same way and ending up at a spot where it's not getting to a successful outcome? So what's your take on digital transformation right now? Like how come it's been failing?
So let's put it in historical context, because everything you described, Jascha, let's just take digital transformation out and put in the word CRM instead. Mm-hmm. You go back to the early 90s where it was exactly that. Let's get that 360-degree view of the customer. Let's have all these systems talking to each other. Let's build these systems, and then money will come raining down from the sky, except that it didn't. And you ask anyone who went through, again, a CRM transformation, what words would you use to describe it? And they'll use words like disaster, failure, giant waste. Back in 2002, which again is a long time ago, I ran an executive education program here at Wharton. What I wanted to call it was, why does CRM suck? They didn't like that name. So they changed it to Solving the CRM Challenge. The program ran one time, because what happened is we bring in all of these people who were part of the big CRM implementation scheme. And all they did is they told war stories about why their implementation was worse than everybody else's. And so it was just this group therapy for just the pain and suffering that everyone went through, because it was all about the system. Let's implement the system, whether it's physical computers or some, organizational thing, or just a process way of thinking. So it's the same thing with digital transformation. It's the same thing with a lot of the analytics stuff that's going on right now. Yeah. That basically the means is becoming an end. People aren't thinking about it very strategically. And that's where I end up being the luckiest guy on earth, because I've been looking at all these patterns and I've been thinking, what is it that we need in order to get companies to see these patterns and to take advantage of them? CRM systems, digital transformation. Yeah. So I've kind of had the long view. I've kind of know what we've wanted to achieve. And then it's just a matter of being able to plug in all of those systems. So basically, I've been very fortunate because I've given a lot of those people a reason to exist. Yeah. Aha, now we know why we're doing that stuff. We knew there was a good reason for it in the first place. Wish we knew it earlier, but better late than never. Yeah. So I've been very lucky to have, again, you could call it theory or models or whatever you want, but it dovetails perfectly with the kinds of systems that people are building.
So is it fair to say that part of the way that you're attacking this problem is by expressing the importance of the notion of customer centricity?
Yes and no. I mean, yes, that's why we're talking, that's why we're doing this session, but that wasn't my original objective. Again, I'm a technician. I just wanted people to use the models. I just was developing these models or stealing them from other people and saying, whoa, this thing works really well. This could really forecast far, and it could let us make granular statements. And wow, this is really good stuff. So I spent most of, let's say, right around 2000, finding a lot of these models and going to companies and saying, hey, look, here's the R code, and here's the spreadsheet, and here's the video, and here's the technical. Go use it. And companies would dismiss me. They would say, oh, you're an academic. That might work well in theory, but our company is different. We're going through a transformation. Our customers are different than everybody else's. They come up with this litany of excuses kind of not to use my stuff. And that's why I turned to the customer centricity, because I was really frustrated. And so I started writing these lightweight books that you referred to, not because that's my thing, but because I just wanted to get people to pay attention. I just wanted to build a Trojan horse so that people would say, well, this is an interesting idea, customer centricity. How do we do this? Well, that's where the models come in.
Yeah.
So I really, the books and a lot of the thought leadership really was a means towards a more technical, nerdy end. But then it ended up sort of taking on a life of its own. And I have to admit, I believe it, I enjoy it. And if that's what lets me talk to smart, interesting people like you, then I'll embrace it.
Let's talk about customer centricity. Like, how would you define it? If I'm a marketer, I'm one of the awesome brands that are listening in on this conversation today. Like, how should I think about what customer centricity really means?
Yeah.
First, from the thought leadership perspective, then let's get into the do leadership side.
Okay, I like it. So first of all, it's a very bad choice of words because people hear those words and they go, oh, yeah, we're centered around the customer. You know, I can't sleep at night unless the customer is happy. And I'm saying, no, that's not what we're talking about. It goes back to something that you mentioned before. I'm just going to put a different noun in there. You said not all data is created equal. I'm saying not every customer is created equal. Customers are wildly different from each other in terms of their perceptions about us, in terms of their propensities to buy us, in terms of, you know, all of the behavioral things that I mentioned, how long they're going to stay around, how often they're going to buy, how much they're going to spend. And, you know, for most companies, they don't want to think about those differences, especially on the marketing side. They're saying, we're coming up with the brand, we're coming up with the message, we're coming up with the product. Now let's go out there and sell the hell out of it. And if you start telling us that there's different customers and different needs, so I'm going to have two different versions of the message, or God forbid, two different versions of the product, they freak out.
Yeah.
I'm coming at it from the other side. I'm saying, wait a minute, these differences across our customers aren't a nuisance. They're an opportunity. Let's sort out those customers. Let's find the really good ones, the ones who will stay with us a long time, and buy a lot of stuff and refer others and be relatively easy and happy to serve. If we can find customers like them, and we can find ways to serve them, and we can find more customers like them. In other words, if we can find the right customers to be centered around, we can make more money. We can do so in a sustainable way. We can do so in a defendable way, in a very ethical way. And I really believe that understanding the differences across customers is a better growth engine than going to the people in R&D and say, hey, what's the next blockbuster you have for us? That's a much riskier way to go and much harder to defend and sustain.
Well, I've got a handful of questions here. I want to start with one that's maybe a framing too. So I've worked in both organizations that focus on a business-to-business go-to-market and organizations that focus on a business-to-consumer go-to-market. Is the notion of customer centricity more applicable to one type of go-to-market over the other?
So each one offers an advantage. But first, let me say the basic patterns are shockingly identical. When we strip away all the verbiage that we describe the thing we sell, when we strip away the verbiage that we use to describe the entities that buy it and the processes that we use to sell it, when we simply say it's customers, not necessarily consumers, buying stuff over time, they differ from each other wildly in terms of how long they're going to do it, how often they're going to do it, how happily they'll do it. When you take the models and you project ahead the lifetime value of each and every customer and say, what does that distribution look like for company A versus company B? The basic pattern is identical. I don't care if we're talking about some big, enterprise SaaS, business communications company, or I don't care if it's some CPG or some kind of, travel online site. The basic patterns of how customers differ from each other are amazingly similar. So here's where the differences come in. On one hand, we tend to think about this, again, as I've been talking about, a lot of people are thinking, consumers, that it just sort of fits more naturally with kind of the vibe of being able to tag and track individual consumers, and we have more of them, so it makes it easier to see those differences. But some of the best practices of customer centricity, of saying they're not all created equal and we're going to do more for some than others, arise fairly naturally in the B2B setting. Because in the B2C, they're just a bunch of customers. Let's just sell it to whoever will buy it. Whereas in B2B, and we have that relationship, and we know the folks, we just know the ones who kind of like us, and we kind of have them in mind as we develop that next product. And we'll kind of, show a little bit of favoritism. We'll take certain ones to play golf and other ones, So that idea of recognizing the difference across customers and surrounding them with a variety of products and services, some of which we make no money on, like playing golf, comes more naturally in B2B. So I want to take the breadth and granularity of B2C. I want to take the willingness to treat customers differently from B2B and bring it all together in a universal way.
Well, that makes an absolutely clear line of sight sense to me. So I appreciate that. You said one thing, and I want to kind of pull that out and talk about it for a moment. You said take the models and use that to identify kind of your best customers. We've got people listening in today who are executives over marketing departments, data scientists, marketing managers, and others, IT folks. What do you mean when you say take the models? Like, how would you describe take the models to an executive in marketing versus somebody who's in data science?
Sure, and the nice thing is that the Zodiac experience gives me a chance not only to talk very specifically about it, but in a non-academic way. So, but we start with the academic part, which is first the necessity, not just the nice to do if you can, the necessity of being able to forecast how many customers are going to acquire, how long they're going to stay with us, what they'll do over that horizon. That's the easy part. I mean, the models for each of these separate behaviors, they're very well established, they're very robust, they're broadly applicable. We can estimate them on lots of different kinds of data. So it's pretty easy to then combine a lot of that stuff together. Once we know how long you're going to stay and how many purchases you're going to make and how much you're going to spend, that gives us lifetime value.
Yeah.
So I'm really serious about it. I know that most of the people listening have LTV or CLV as part of their vocabulary, but either they're not doing it or they're doing it in some loosey-goosey way because no one is ever going to hold them accountable, or they're really skeptical about it. Yeah. You can really do it. And it's remarkable how easy it is to do. So that part, for me as a technician, that comes for free. But now comes the managerial part. So again, we wave our magic wand, we get all of these lifetime values, we look at this histogram and we say, whoa, there's these customers on the right who are incredibly valuable. There's not that many of them, 80-20 rule and all that. But for that 20 who are really valuable, what makes them different? And specifically, to go out there and do like what we did at Zodiac all the time is we would do Facebook lookalikes. Now that idea isn't new, all companies do it, but the problem is garbage in, garbage out. Okay. So I'll tell you a true story. We worked with an online digitally native women's accessory company, and they just knew that their core customers were millennials, of course, and they're out there, looking everywhere for millennials and paying a whole lot of money for them and getting really frustrated when they find out that those millennials aren't buying their accessories as often as they'd like. We say, you know what? Your intuition might not be any good. Let's trust the data instead. Let's just go to the data and find out which of your customers are the most valuable. Who is that big spike on the right of those customers who will stay with us a long time, buy very often? And it turns out that A, they actually are very few millennials in that group, and B, even within that group, there's not a single persona. We can't simply say, well, they're 18 to 34-year-old women who earn a certain amount of money. There's a lot of variability there. Yeah. So we go to Facebook and we say, hey, Facebook, we want you to find us a mix of people that match this mix for these really good customers over here. And it's like printing money because we're going after customers who are proven to be really valuable, yet at the same time, it's customers that basically nobody else in this particular sector is looking for. So we're getting good customers, cheap, and to basically rinse and repeat. It's not that hard. It just goes against the intuition and the traditional practices that most firms are locked into.
Yeah, I totally buy that. I think as a business manager, I had historically been afraid to expose all of the data that was available because I thought it would open me up to criticism, maybe. And I also was always afraid that I never had the right data to be able to start to build these models. You've taken a pretty discrete approach in the way that you've built these models out. And it's not about collecting every bit of data that exists in the business, right?
That's right. As anyone in my family would acknowledge, I'm a cheapskate. And it's true for data just as it's for everything else. And a part of that, I'm going to go back to the theory, the academic thing. I've always been curious about how little data do we need. Like these models work super well. Suppose we had a shorter calibration period, or suppose we had fewer customers, or suppose we couldn't get the data at a moment-to-moment level, but it was like just rolled up, and we could only get it on a quarterly basis. So for years, I've been asking these kinds of questions of how little data do we need. It was almost just sort of an academic type question.
Right.
But then along comes GDPR or CCPA, where all of a sudden companies can't expose as much data or use as much data as they'd like to. They're forced to use different kinds of aggregation and different kinds of computational considerations. So even if we had all of the data and we could use it, the models will run a whole lot faster. And it turns out also more robustly if we can just kind of hone in on a limited subset of it. So I've spent a long time trying to think about, how little data do we need? Yeah. But running the same exact model, whether I had the transaction logs or some of this rolled up data, and just, again, doing the math that enables me and companies to do it.
Yeah. Well, Danny, who's listening to us right now, typed in a question and asked, does a firm need to define their own model, or is this a proprietary model that you've built out? Or like you're talking about something particularly interesting here. It's like, you don't need all the data. So is this magic? Like, how do you, if I'm a business, think about it?
Okay, so let me talk about the magical model that's at the heart of it. And remember, I'm an academic, so all this stuff is out there in the public domain. And I am very happy to share the spreadsheets and our code and technical notes and videos. Please, it would give me great pleasure to send you my CLV starter kit. Tell you a story. Back right around the turn of the century, I was building a repeat purchase model. And I noticed that when we acquire a group of customers and just watch them over time, just look for the total number of purchases from that cohort, that the purchases almost always tend to drop off. Mm-hmm. So I would kind of tell a story about how customers would kind of slow down their purchasing over time. Great, fine, whatever. Got some academic paper, it's not that interesting. But along the way, as I was writing that paper, some of the academic reviewers said, you ought to benchmark your model against this old obscure model from 1987 by these other academics. I didn't want to because I wanted my thing to win. But I tried it, and this other model won. It kicked ass over my model. And I'll tell you the story about it real quick. So basically, bottom line is, the models that I'm endorsing, the models that I'm using, that I'm referring to here, I didn't invent them. I just kind of reluctantly adopted them. They're known as buy till you die models, BTYD. If you search that, you'll find a ton of resources on it. And it basically goes like this. It's a story that you and nobody is going to believe. And I'm not saying it's a true story, but as an as-if approximation of the truth, it's amazing. So it basically says you are carrying two coins. One of them is the buy coin, that every period while you're alive as a customer, you flip that coin, heads I buy, tails I don't. And it could be on a daily basis, weekly, monthly, it depends on the cadence associated with that product or service. And I've worked with all of them. But then there's the second coin, the die coin. Then every day, week, month, year, you flip that other coin. And as long as that one keeps coming up heads, that just gives you the right to keep flipping the first coin. But when that bad boy comes up tails, you're gone and you're gone for good. Yeah. So it basically says this. Each person buys in kind of they have a steady rate, although they might buy randomly around that baseline. Mm-hmm. And then some point, shit happens, boom, it drops to zero. Either you no longer like this brand and you switch to another one, or you no longer need this category, or you anonymize, or you move, or you die. I don't know. But this very harsh, overly simplistic model of buy till you die is remarkable at how well it fits, forecasts, explains, targets. And I can go on for days about the model, about the breadth of its applications to wildly unrelated domains like animal tracking and pediatric asthma and crime recidivism. I could talk about all those applications. But when it comes to customer behavior, which is what we care about, you should basically accept it as truth and then allocate your resources and your managerial practices accordingly.
It's interesting. So we had a question that came in from, I think, an analytics person that's at 7-Eleven, and they said, particularly in convenience and retail, we see high frequency members and long tail, medium and low frequency members. What are some strategies to determine the value of low frequency customers appropriately? Is this that path?
Yeah. So this one of the beautiful things about these models is that whether you're someone who comes in there and buys that cup of coffee and donut every day, or someone who only comes in, once every 6 months when your mother-in-law comes to town and she wants a certain kind of, beef jerky or something, I don't know. That's one of the important aspects of validation. That's actually one of the ways that these models actually tend to outperform machine learning approaches, is that they do really well at both ends of the spectrum.
Yeah.
It's funny. I've actually done a lot of work with convenience stores. I mean, all the time I'm talking to people at the National Association of Convenience Stores and basically yelling at them, because that tends to be a sector that's terrible in this regard, about tagging and tracking individual customers, about developing and properly leveraging a loyalty program or some other way of understanding individuals at that point of purchase. So, again, I've had the pleasure of working with some, and it's beautiful how well these patterns work. And that leads to really the gist of the question is, what should we do with those low value customers? And this is one of these great examples of where managerial practice does not align with my worldview.
Okay.
You see, for too many companies, and it's not just for C-stores, it's for every company on the planet, telcos, financial services, we go out there and acquire as many customers as we can as cheaply as possible. And then we look at these customers, and most of them are, they're the once every 6 month beef jerky buyer. And we say, okay, how do we make them good? How do we turn these ugly ducklings into beautiful swans? And we take it as a personal failing that some of these customers don't love us. What did we do wrong? Don't take it personally. Most of your customers are and they will be no matter what you do.
Yeah.
So live with it. Again, it's the 80-20 rule. So don't hyper focus on that kind of long tail of not so good customers. Let's instead look to the other side and say, who are these awesome ones, and what makes them different, and how do we find more like them? A great example of this, I'm sure many of your listeners would be aware of it, would be Net Promoter Score, NPS.
Yep.
And so we find out how many promoters we have, we find out how many detractors we have, we look at the differences. So right there, I love NPS because it explicitly sorts out the two groups. But the problem is, for too many companies, is, okay, how do we turn these detractors into promoters?
Right.
And I'm saying, don't. I mean, it would be nice if you could, but you can't. Instead, let's clone the promoters. Let's find out what makes them different and acquire more like them. That's going to be a higher ROI activity than kind of worrying about the low end customers. We don't want to fire them. We don't want to treat them badly. We want to try to nudge them upwards, but we're not going to transform them as much as we might like to.
So that's interesting. Stephen wrote into us as we were talking and asked the question around, in the absence of transaction logs, what proxy data can you use to substitute economic value? But maybe it's just value generally. So is this a concept? You can kind of pick whatever singularly you want to look at, and then you start to rotate your focus against that one particular measure?
Yes and no.
Okay.
In the end, you kind of have to have transaction logs. Even if you don't have the transaction logs, goes back to what we were saying before. You need to have, summary data arising from transaction logs. I need to know how many active customers I have and how often they're buying. I need stuff like that, even if it's not as granular as I'd like it.
Okay.
But if you're just getting off the ground, if you're just thinking about this customer centricity stuff and you don't have a good CRM system or you don't trust it, something like Net Promoter Score, some kinds of attitudinal metrics can serve as a reasonable proxy for you to at least start to see those differences across the customers and to understand what makes those high value customers different, and then to take some of those insights and diffuse them through the organization so we can treat those customers differentially. So I'm actually, again, a big fan of NPS, but here's one of my wonderful, happy, coincidental success stories. The guy who runs NPS over at Bain Consulting, Rob Markey, he and I are like peas in a pod, and he himself recognized, and it's wonderful to hear him talk about it, that NPS was like, the coolest thing 20 years ago. It really was a great way to sort out those so-so customers from the really good ones and taking the difference across them for companies to see how well they're doing. But Rob is very much on my bandwagon now, saying in addition to those attitudinal metrics, we must have these customer metrics as well. And we can even agree on what they are. So we're not saying it depends. We can really whittle it down. So yeah, we can start with the attitudinal. And you know what? Even after you have the transactional, there's still some insight that the attitudinal metrics and even demographics and geolocation and you know and psychometrics might bring to us. But we're going to start with our behavioral data and then bring in those other metrics on an as-needed basis to try to explain what's left over.
Yeah.
But we'd rather not start with them if we can avoid it.
Got it. That makes sense. Peter, this is a really fun conversation. I'm enjoying it. I feel like every time I get a chance to talk to you, I learn more, which I get excited about. We're coming close to the end of our time. I want to end in one kind of topic area kind of broadly. I want to talk about AI and ML and kind of your view of AI and ML and its usefulness. So we've been talking about the models that you're helping organizations deploy. Those are not ML-driven models. They
Correct.
are actuarial models. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
So can you talk about kind of why actuarial models are important for organizations, especially those that are going to focus on kind of being, I'm not sure if you said this term or not, but I'm going to call you a data miser, which I kind of dig.
Right.
So if you're a data miser, you need to focus on actuarial models, getting the right data together first. That's your point of view generally? Is that correct?
Yeah. So let's first talk about this idea of an actuarial model, because I bet most of your listeners don't have a clue what you're talking about. They may not even know what an actuary does. You know, they're just not someone in insurance. So what an actuary does for a living is they understand the nature of the risks, but they also know their limitations. So they're not going to tell you, Jascha, what day you're going to die. They're just going to say, for a group of people who share the same relevant behavioral characteristics as you, what percent of them will live to be 80 years old? So that's what an actuarial model does. And that's basically what my models do. It's to say what percent of customers will still be active with us 2 years from now. And what percent of them will buy 3 or more times. So these models are kind of embrace the uncertainty. We recognize that our ability to make precise estimates of any one specific individual is somewhat limited. But to make estimates of microsegments, relevantly defined microsegments, is really, really good. The problem with machine learning approaches is that they don't embrace they tend not to embrace the uncertainty quite as good. We're trying to say, when you will die, when you will buy next, what is the next thing that you will do, as opposed to just being probabilistic about it. So what I like to do is to run these actuarial models to give us that baseline, to give us that sense of how long that cohort will stay with us and a sense of what they'll do with that horizon. And then bring in the machine learning on top of that, just as we were talking about some of the other kinds of data, to basically take more or less the residuals from our actuarial model and then machine learn the hell out of them to try to explain all those deviations in terms of marketing actions, customer preferences, competition, macroeconomy. So there's actually a wonderful synergy between running these baseline actuarial models and bringing in all that big data and all the ML stuff to kind of explain what's left over and to help fine tune the decisions that should be made. It shouldn't be either or. There really is room for both. And again, it's going to be different methods, different data, maybe even different people in the organization who are running one type of model versus the other, but they fit together beautifully.
Yeah, we certainly find that to be the case. In fact, over the course of the last several years, as we've been working across hundreds of different customers, what we found is that kind of one, I think reinforcing the points that you've been making, the most important data that customers need, our customers or brands need to have, is behavioral data. Like, what are your customers doing? At the point that you get that kind of organized, roughly our machine learning models need about the majority of the data that is necessary is actually behavioral. It's like 80+% of it. And that's a really big and important learning. Like, it shouldn't be about, let's go and find every single derivative potentially out there. It's about focus on behaviors and then focus on the patterns that might help you make better decisions. So we're totally in line with that. I think it's a really exciting space to start to explore. But I think fundamentally it comes down to the first step in the process, which is an acknowledgement that it isn't about connecting everything together in all of your data lakes. It's about being very specific about what data is going to help you understand your CLV better, and then starting to build from there.
That's right. And the nice thing about that is, what data do I want? So if a certain company comes to me and says, we want one of your CLV models, I'm not going to say, well, what kind of data do you have? I know what I want. Okay. I know the questions I'm going to ask, how many customers I'm going to acquire, how long they're going to stay. I know what the inputs will be. Then it might be a bit of a negotiation
Mm-hmm.
of whether they have the data at the right kind of granularity or accuracy. But I know what I'm looking for. It's
Yeah.
very it's very purposeful and directed, as opposed to just give me whatever you have and I'll make the best of it. I want, and this is what I emphasize to all my students all the time, before you touch the data, I want you to think very carefully about what you expect to see, what directions the coefficients should go in, and if you and commit to it, write it down on paper. And if you start seeing that, oh my goodness, the age variable popped but was negative instead of positive, then you don't have the right to use it. So I want people to kind of go out on a limb and kind of commit to the behavioral story. And then even if the model isn't perfect, that's okay, because it will have at least good principled reasoning behind it. And ultimately, I don't want to come up with models that necessarily fit the best. I want models that are going to forecast the best. And I'm willing to sacrifice some of that fit in order to be able to make those kinds of long run statements.
Right. So you always want to make the better decisions in the business, and that's where you're going to get there when you're forecasting.
Mm-hmm.
I really appreciate you taking the time with all of us today. My very last question for you is, what are you working on right now? And kind of, I suppose it's a 1.5 question. And the last would be, if somebody is really excited about what we've talked about, how can they follow up with you or get involved in the research that you're doing?
Yeah, so the stuff I'm working on now is so exciting, so interesting. This idea of customer-based corporate valuation. So yeah, we went over marketing, that's great. Now let's went over finance. And if you think about the same metrics I was talking about, how many customers are going to acquire, how much they're going to stay, and this and that, add all that up, that's the cash flow of the company. That's the value of the firm. So spending a lot of time these days working with private equity firms, other kinds of investors, and even corporates, but CFOs and VPs of investor relations instead of, or in addition to marketing, taking the very same models that I've been referring to, but showing the finance people why they can benefit from them as well. And then once they do, then winning over marketing and creating alignment between them is easy. Yeah. So my new company, Theta Equity Partners, if you were to look at the site, revolutionizing finance through customer-based corporate valuation. The reality is I'm not a finance guy. And as much as I want finance people to pay attention to me, I'm a marketing guy. But I recognize that if I can win over finance, it's going to make it that much easier to win over marketing as well.
Yeah. Well, the fastest path to have somebody fall in love with you is to feed them, right? And this is the same way. The fastest path to have marketing love you is to help that CFO understand the way that you should be making investments. Right. If somebody wants to get in touch with you or see any of the research that they're doing, any recommended places they would go? We're fortunate that we're going to be able to give everybody that's in attendance today a copy of your book. So awesome. We're excited about that. In addition to that, what else might you recommend they do?
Well, actually, if you're interested in that latter piece about the customer-based corporate valuation, you go to thetaequity.com. Theta, the Greek letter, not my name. But you know what? Google my name, because like I said, I'm putting stuff out there all the time. And so just lots of resources. And not only as an academic, but my middle name is Cher. It really is. And I live that. So I'm just very, very happy to share any resources, advice. I've been so gratified about how people have been, kind of taking the bait and have been interested, just like yourself. I'm just delighted to keep the conversation going through LinkedIn, Twitter, whatever else.
Awesome. Well, Peter, on behalf of myself, Lytics, an organization who believes that when you connect the right data and the right data science together, you can make better decisions on behalf of marketing, a very, very, very hearty thank you. We appreciate your time very much.
My pleasure. Again, I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you, the great questions that you and others have been asking, and wish you all the best as you go down that customer-centric path.
Awesome. Thank you.
Bye now.